My memories of Ed, and Eddy is actually kind of a fun one. I remember various different previews getting ready to push forward the series, and I remember having so much speculation as to what the actual character of the Eds actually would be. And let me tell you, when I actually did get introduced to them, I wasn't ready for what I got. Now, oddly enough, the first episode of Ed, and Eddy that I actually watched was not actually the premiere. It was actually the second episode a week later. I guess for some reason I missed the original premiere because for the longest time I thought the original first episode of Ed, and Eddy was Pop Goes the Ed. The episode where they're trying to get into Naz's sprinkler party and all the weird trials and tribulations they went through in order to get to there. But no, it was the Ed Touchables, which honestly speaking, was an episode I never really cared about. Honestly, I cared more for the B story, Nag to the Ed, which introduced the Canker sisters more than the first episode. And for the most part, that was honestly my relationship with Ed, and Eddy. Episodes I loved, episodes I didn't care too much about. I never really hated any specific episode of Ed, and Eddy. Honestly, every episode, at least to some degree, had something in it that I love. Or maybe I'm just looking at it through rose-tinted glasses. But when it came to Ed, and Eddy, it was the lovable cast of characters that made the series. The infinite weirdness that is Ed is something to behold. His, I guess, stupidity, but at the same time he could be brilliant in other ways. And for what he lacked in intelligence, he made up with in boundless, bizarre strength. Of course, back when I was a kid, he was the most quotable out of any character. Not a kid alive during the late 90s didn't say the word buttered toast at some point in their life. He was just that much of an iconic presence. I loved Double D and how weird he was. The mystery of what's under his hat. But, I loved how much of a nerd he could kind of be, too. But he was also kind of the soul and conscience of the Eds. If there was any Ed who would just normally get along with the rest of the kids in the cul-de-sac, it would be Double D. Deep down he was a friendly, nice guy who just hung out with, well, let's be honest, a bad person. And that bad person is Eddy, the grifter, the scammer, the used car salesman in kid form. Always trying to scam kids out of their money in order to get jawbreakers. Honestly, the only reason I ever ate jawbreakers was because of Ed, and Eddy. And I didn't even really care for jawbreakers like that because they were annoying to try to get through. But I will be damned if Eddy's obsession with jawbreakers didn't make me want one at every turn. The schemes, the scams, they were so far out there, and it took Double D's mind in order to build all the stuff around it. And considering all the effort that they would put into making these scams, they probably could have come up with something far more productive and far more likely to actually get them actual money. But no, and these schemes of Eddy would always put them on the outs with the rest of the kids in the cul-de-sac. And most of the time, they usually got what they deserved in the end. Mostly Eddy. Because, I'll be honest, usually whenever Ed and Double D suffered because of Eddy, I always felt the worst. Because it was always Eddy's fault. And the person they probably suffered the most at the hands of was Ed's little sister, Sarah. A terror. My God. The voice she was given is literal chalkboard on nails. Yes, I said that right. The perfect embodiment of what is a 9 or 10-year-old child. Bossy, mean-spirited and overly dramatic about everything that the Eds do. Even when the Eds aren't in the wrong, they're usually in the wrong when it comes to Sarah. Honestly, sometimes it's hard to tell who's more of a menace at points, Sarah or Eddy. But at least Sarah has the benefit of being a protector of the ever wimpy Jimmy. This brace-faced amoeboy of a child, it could be knocked over by a slight gust of wind. Jimmy is sweetness and sugar embodied in the form of a child. Nice to a fault, but very much a drama queen. The most fun in episodes I usually had with Jimmy is where Jimmy went against character, because he very rarely ever broke character. But when Jimmy lost it, he lost it, and it was always fun to see. And of course, my favorite character, Plank. Also Johnny 2x4. But man, Plank was the best. Do you remember that song, My Best Friend Plank? I love that song. There was also another song, like, I'm Not Coming In Anymore. Like that other Ed, Edd n Eddy song. Like, oh man, classic Cartoon Network had the best stuff. But Plank would be your best friend. Plank was amazing, because Johnny really sold Plank. Like, if you didn't buy it at times, sometimes there would be moments where Plank would just do stuff, and you'd be like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. But again, it's Ed, Edd n Eddy. It's never made sense. It will never make sense. These kids' anatomies and the way this world works is held together with some glue and some toothpicks. So if something bizarre happens in this series, you might as well just roll with it. And speaking of bizarre, Rolf. Ed boys! Life has many doors, Ed boys! I love the weirdness that is Rolf. The only character to out-weird Ed. Because Rolf is a foreign exchange student and nothing about his customs make any sense. And are just balls to the wall weird. Just out there. It's just like, where does he come from? God, pick any place in maybe the Ukraine and there you go. Obviously raised on a farm with the endless strength that he has, Rolf is a meme machine. Just because he was just so ambiguous in where he came from, and the way he talked was just so fun and out there, and the quickest guy to give a beating to the Eds. I will never forget the episode where he beat the shit out of Eddy with a fish. And Eddy had it coming. But I felt so bad for Eddy at the end of it, because it was just like, my God, Rolf just did a number on him. And speaking of picking on Eddy, Kevin. Oh my God. Jerks named Kevin in animation. If I had a nickel for every Kevin who was a jerk in animation, it's just, I love the character though. The red hat, the green shirt. He was an obvious jerk and a jock, but at the same time, most of the times that he would pick on Eddy, it was kind of deserved, because he knew the Eds were up to something. He was one of the first people to know the Eds are up to something, and they usually are. But sometimes he would pick on the Eds in a way that they didn't have it coming. Just mocking them, teasing them, left, right, and center. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I would always be like, they probably did something at some point to piss him off, so I just kind of have to roll with it. But sometimes, if there was ever a character who sometimes deserved a comeuppance as much as Eddy, it was usually Kevin in a lot of places. Him and that douchebag bike of his, like, oh man, this kid is gonna grow up to be a grade A douchebag. And the person who will probably end up dating that douchebag, Naz. Naz is such a strange entity. Probably the most least interesting of all the cul-de-sac kids. Just basically the pretty one. and honestly, not even that pretty by most standards. It was mostly the aloofness that she had. She just kind of went with the flow of certain things, and that's kind of what made her cool, and never outright hostile towards the Eds. She was cool with everyone until she wasn't. If there was ever a fun get-together, it was usually at Naz's house. Very chill, very fun, very awesome. But speaking of girls, the Canker sisters, Lee, Marie, and May. The girls who had the crush on the Eds. What a terror. I love the Cankers, and I also hated the Cankers in a lot of places, because if there was ever a punishment for the Eds, that punishment is the Canker sisters. Growing up literally in a trailer, like, I'm trying not to be rude, but they're literally trailer trash, but they're the best kinds of trailer trash. Sweet until they're not, caring until they're not, and a group of girls that the kids of the cul-de-sac all fear. Almost like a roving gang of misfits. And some of the few characters who we actually know of having a last name, oddly enough. To a certain degree, I kind of wish at some point we would have had a moment where the Eds were kind of into the Cankers outside of their introduction, but at the same time, they're crazy. These girls are crazy. They're out their goddamn minds. And honestly, their personalities are almost interchangeable, and they always force themselves on the Eds, and that is a no-go. These girls are violent also. Like, if there's any character more likely to cause more destruction than the Eds, it's the Canker sisters. They're a different kind of dangerous. With Lee having an interest in Eddy, it's obvious that Lee is the leader of all of them, which is hilarious because she shares the same voice actor as Sarah, who absolutely despises Eddy. Marie, who is definitely my favorite, because honestly, she's the cutest. With that blue hair and half covering her eye, I'm just like, ooh, and there's my type. Also, I love the color blue, too. I couldn't help that. You know, 9-year-old me was... Well, actually, this series came out when I was 8, so 8-year-old me was definitely into Marie. But unfortunately, Marie had probably the least amount of personality amongst the Cankers, and also, interestingly enough, shared the same voice actor as Kevin, which I always thought was kind of funny because Kevin and Double D probably had the best relationship out of all of the Eds. And last, and honestly kind of least, you had May, who was the dumb one, really, and she had an interest in Ed, and it was obvious why she had an interest in Ed, because to a certain extent, May was smarter than Ed, so that was the only thing she had over him. And it was especially funny because she shared the same 2 voice actors as Naz, which I always thought was kind of funny to a certain degree, because it's just like, okay, you have the actual dumb blonde and the kind of dumb blonde, but the Cankers were always the punishment that the Eds would receive, but very rarely did it seem like they deserved. But, you know, Ed, Edd and Eddy was a fun time, and ending things off with Ed, Edd and Eddy's Big Picture show, where we were finally introduced to Eddy's older brother, was fantastic. Still to this day, people have so much speculation as to what the Eds did to piss off the entirety of the kids of the cul-de-sac, that they were out for blood and the Eds had to go on the run so that they could get to Eddy's brother, who they thought would help them out, only for us to see the mythical Eddy's brother, who we talked about with such reverence, was just a jerk. And the fact that the kids of the cul-de-sac actually took pity on Eddy after all of that was actually the perfect way to kind of cap that off. Ed, Edd and Eddy really doesn't need to return because it ran the gauntlet. You know, we've seen them in their endless summer. We got to see them in a school setting during season 5. They ran the gauntlet of everything I could have looked forward to in Ed, Edd and Eddy. And I can't see a show like this ever coming back in the same way. There are so many other shows that have tried to come back and to diminished returns, and Ed, Edd n Eddy would definitely be one of them. This series was one of a kind. It had almost 10 glorious years, running fully up until 2007, with the Big Picture show coming out in 2009. It ran the gauntlet. It did what it needed to do. It was fantastic. It was fun. It was fresh. It was funky. It was weird. It was wild. Just all the adjectives. And at most, maybe bring it back for a special. Definitely bring the series creator, Danny Antonucci, back with it. But this series is done. It washed its hands. It had its grand finale. The Big Bow was the Big Picture show. You don't need to go further with this. Ed, Edd n Eddy lives forever in my heart, a glorious part of my childhood, and a wonderful memory. But tell me your thoughts on Ed, Edd n Eddy in the comment section below. What was your favorite part, or hell, better yet, your favorite character? Because honestly, that's the thing about me. It's just like, my favorite characters, Double D, Kevin, for some reason, Plank. But I love all my children wholeheartedly. But tell me your favorite. What was your favorite episode? What started you on Ed, Edd n Eddy? Do you have fond memories of it? Do you think you would have been scammed by the Eds? I definitely would have, at least twice. But tell me your thoughts and feelings in the comment section below. Like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for more of my 2D memories. And until next time, I've been Duuz-Diz-Din, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.